My daughter-in-law made it clear that I wasn't part of their family when she shut the door in my face. I said nothing that night. But within weeks, I stopped babysitting, changed the locks, and started building a life they could no longer take for granted. The glass casserole dish felt warm against my palms as I reached the porch steps. Inside, voices mingled with the clatter of silverware. I had spent 4 hours simmering the beef roast Nolan loved since childhood, packing 2 extra containers so they would have meals for the upcoming work week. Through the front window, I could see Brielle arranging wine glasses across the center island, her hair styled for an event I had not been told about. When I tapped lightly on the wooden frame, the laughter inside ceased. Brielle appeared at the screen door, her expression shifting instantly into tight restraint. She did not push the latch open. Instead, she stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her back until it clicked firmly. "Mom, don't come. This is a family matter," Brielle said, keeping her voice low and even. Her tone carried no heat, only an efficient dismissal that hit harder than shouting. Through the mesh, Nolan stood near the refrigerator, holding a serving platter. He looked directly at me, hesitated, and then turned his attention back to slicing baguettes. "I brought dinner for the week," I replied steadily, keeping my hands level beneath the heavy dish. "We have catering arriving in 20 minutes, Brielle said, glancing at the driveway behind me. "Nolan's promotion dinner is tonight. My parents flew in from Denver and we invited his regional director. Having extra people around crowds the dining room. It's better if we keep this to our immediate circle." The words settled like cold iron. I had helped paint those dining room walls only 2 months ago, taping the baseboards while Nolan worked overtime. I did not raise my voice or demand an explanation from my son across the room. "I understand," I said. I turned around, walked down the concrete path, placed the warm dish onto the passenger seat, and started my car. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds of my modest suburban ranch house. At 64, after 30 years managing inventory for an industrial supply company, I understood how systems functioned. People established patterns based on convenience and perceived value. For the past 3 years, my Tuesday and Thursday mornings belonged entirely to Brielle and Nolan, caring for 4-year-old Clara so they could save on preschool costs. At 7, my phone vibrated against the counter. It was a standard group text from Brielle containing Clara's daily schedule, dietary instructions, and a reminder to fold the laundry in the basement before noon. There was no mention of the promotion dinner, no acknowledgement of the locked screen door, and no apology for the wasted roast resting in my refrigerator. I poured my black coffee, sat down with my ledger, and reviewed my week. For 2 years, I had altered my own schedule, skipping community library book sales, postponing dental cleanings, and rushing home to manage my yard before dark. I did not reply to the text immediately. At 8 sharp, Brielle's sedan pulled into my driveway. She hurried up the walk, holding Clara by the hand, a large canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. When I opened the front door, Brielle moved to hand me the bag without making direct eye contact. "Nolan has early client meetings today," Brielle said briskly, checking her watch. "I need to be at the marketing agency by 8:30. Her lunch is packed, but she needs her snack at 10. "I see," I said calmly, stepping aside so Clara could run toward the toy bin in the corner. "We'll pick her up around 5:30, Brielle added, turning toward her car without pausing. I watched her drive away. The dismissal from the night before was not an isolated incident. It was simply the first time she had stated her boundaries aloud. By noon, I had washed Clara's lunch dishes and wiped down the small wooden table. Instead of sorting through baskets of clothes or dusting the living room baseboards during her nap, I sat at my desk and opened the local community college catalog. Before retiring, I had always intended to take their Certified Archival Preservation course, a 4-month program designed for cataloging historical local records. When Nolan arrived at 5:45 to collect his daughter, he walked into the kitchen with an easy familiarity, tossing his car keys onto my side table. He wore his new management lanyard, looking relaxed, yet distracted. "Smells good in here," Mom, Nolan said, scanning the stove for leftovers. Finding none, He opened the refrigerator, noticed the untouched casserole from 2 nights prior, and quickly closed the door. Thanks for watching Clara today. Work was crazy. Clara had a good afternoon, I said, handing him her small backpack, already zipped and placed by the coat rack. Take her jacket. The temperature dropped. Great. Brielle said she'll drop her off Thursday at 7. As usual, he replied, reaching for the doorknob. Thursday will not work, Nolan, I said clearly. He paused, his hand hovering over the brass handle. What do you mean? You always have her on Thursdays. I registered for an archival course at the county center, I told him without hesitation. Classes run Tuesdays and Thursdays from 8 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon. Starting next week, you will need to arrange alternative care for those mornings. Nolan blinked, clearly caught off guard. Mom daycares charge full-time rates even for part-time slots. Can't you take an evening class? The county archives only offer practical lab hours during the morning shift, I answered evenly. You have 4 days to make arrangements. He frowned, murmured something about checking with Brielle, and led Clara to his car. On Friday morning, I drove down to the community library to pick up my assigned coursework materials. The structured routine felt refreshing. For years, I had organized my life around potential family emergencies, keeping my calendar open in case Brielle needed last-minute errand runs or Nolan required someone to wait for utility technicians at their house. When I returned home at noon, I noticed tire tracks on the wet gravel near my garage. Inside the kitchen, a grocery bag sat on the center island. A note from Brielle lay beside it. Dropped off some dry goods from our wholesale run. Left the lawn fertilizer in your shed. Borrowed the pressure washer. I walked out to the detached shed behind my garden. My heavy-duty commercial pressure washer, a durable machine my late husband and I purchased a decade ago, was gone. They had used their spare key to enter my property while I was away taking equipment without asking, operating under the assumption that my resources remained permanently shared while their own life remained private. I walked back inside, took a small screwdriver from the utility drawer, and removed the spare key that hung inside my pantry door. Then I drove to the local hardware store on Main Street. I purchased 3 new deadbolt sets with reinforced strike plates. By 4 that afternoon, all exterior locks on my house and storage shed were replaced. I placed the new brass keys onto my personal ring, dropped the old ones into a metal tin, and stored them in my file cabinet. An hour later, my phone pinged with a notification from Nolan. Hey, Mom. Brielle wants to know if you can take Clara all day Saturday so we can attend an open house downtown. I typed my reply immediately. No, Nolan. I have research assignments scheduled for Saturday morning. Sunday morning brought steady rain across the neighborhood. Traditionally, Sunday meant breakfast at my house. Nolan would come over to mow my front lawn, and Brielle would join us for pancakes before they did their weekly shopping. It was an unspoken arrangement that had lasted nearly 2 years. At 9, Nolan's truck pulled into the driveway. He jogged through the rain up to the porch, holding his toolbox under one arm. When he tried his key in the front door, the lock refused to turn. He jiggled the handle, tried again, and then knocked firmly on the wood. I opened the door wearing my raincoat and gardening boots. Keys sticking. Mom, Nolan said, shaking water from his shoulders. Must have swollen with the rain. The lock is new, Nolan, I said, stepping onto the covered porch and closing the door behind me. He stared at the brass fixture. Why did you change the locks? Because equipment was taken from my shed on Friday without my knowledge, I said, calmly. My home is not an open supply closet. If you need to borrow tools, you ask beforehand and you collect them when I am home. Nolan shifted uncomfortably, setting his toolbox on the cedar bench. Brielle was just trying to help by dropping off those bulk groceries. She needed the washer for our back patio. We're family, Mom. You don't need to lock us out. Family includes mutual consideration, I replied, looking directly into his eyes. When you stood in your kitchen last week and allowed your wife to tell me I was not part of your family matter, you established a boundary. I am simply respecting that boundary on my own property. Nolan opened his mouth to argue, but the reality of his own silence on that evening left him without an answer. He looked down at the porch floorboards, unable to sustain my gaze. 2 weeks passed quietly. The quiet was not empty. It was productive. I attended my morning archive classes, learning to handle century-old county deeds, tax ledgers, and photographic plates. The work required focus, steady hands, and meticulous organization skills I had honed during decades of logistics management. The county historical director, a sharp woman named Eleanor, quickly noticed my efficiency and offered me a paid part-time archivist position starting the following month. Meanwhile, small signs of strain surfaced from Nolan's household. Without my free morning childcare, Brielle had been forced to enroll Clara in a local early learning center with strict drop-off times. Nolan missed 2 of his usual gym sessions to handle morning commutes, and Brielle no longer had weekday hours free for personal appointments. One Tuesday afternoon, Brielle called my cell phone. Her tone was carefully modulated, stripped of its usual dismissive efficiency, though her underlying impatience remained detectable. Marin. Hello, Brielle began using my first name as she often did when trying to sound professional. We're organizing Clara's 5th birthday party for next month. We reserved a pavilion at Riverfront Park. I wanted to see if you would handle the food preparation like you did last year. The finger sandwiches and sheet cake saved us a lot of time. I sat at my kitchen table reviewing my new work contract with the county archives. The request was entirely transactional, framed as an invitation, but designed as an unpaid catering assignment. I won't be able to prepare the food, Brielle, I stated clearly. I am working 15 hours a week at the historical center now. I will gladly attend as Clara's grandmother bring her a gift and sit with the guests. A heavy pause lingered on the line. It's a lot of work for Nolan and me to do alone, Brielle said, her voice tightening. Then ordering simple platters would be best, I replied. On a crisp Thursday evening, both Nolan and Brielle arrived at my home together. Clara was staying with Brielle's parents, who were visiting again for the weekend. When I answered the door, Brielle did not wait on the porch. She walked directly into the foyer, her arms crossed over her wool coat, while Nolan followed a step behind, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Marin, we need to clear the air, Brielle said, standing near the coat rack. You've been pulling away since last month. You changed the locks, you cut back on helping with Clara, and you refused to help with her party. Nolan says you're holding a grudge because of his promotion dinner. I gestured toward the living room chairs, but remained standing near my desk. I do not hold grudges, Brielle. I respond to facts. That dinner was a high-stakes professional networking event, Brielle argued, her voice rising slightly. My father helped arrange Nolan's interview with that director. We needed to keep the guest list focused. You showed up unannounced with food we didn't ask for. Telling you it was private wasn't an insult. It was managing our household. You did not say it was private, I answered, maintaining a steady, measured tone. You said, Mom, don't come. This is a family matter. You stood on your porch and informed me that I was outside your family circle. Brielle flushed slightly, shifting her stance. You took that completely out of context. You're punishing your own son over a misunderstanding. I looked at Nolan, who was staring intently at the rug. Nolan, did you consider it a misunderstanding when you turned your back while your wife locked the screen door? Nolan swallowed hard, glancing between his wife and me, trapped between the narrative Brielle had constructed and the reality he had witnessed firsthand. The living room fell completely silent. The hum of the refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen was the only sound in the house. Nolan looked at Brielle, whose eyes signaled him to reinforce her argument, and then he looked at me. I should have said something that night, Mom, Nolan said quietly, the admission heavy with embarrassment. I knew you cooked that dinner for us. I didn't want to cause an argument with Brielle right before the guests arrived. I thought you would understand. Understanding does not mean accepting disrespect, Nolan, I said. When you choose silence during an injustice, you agree with the action. For 3 years, I have provided free labor, open access to my home, and complete flexibility while you treated my presence as a burden to be managed whenever company arrived. Brielle stepped forward, clearly irritated by Nolan's concession. We have never treated you poorly, Maren. We include you in holidays. But Nolan and I have our own family unit now. We have to set boundaries for our careers and our future. I completely agree with setting boundaries, I replied calmly, walking over to my desk and picking up my planner. Which is why I am maintaining mine. You established that your home and milestones are separate from me. Therefore, my time, my home, and my resources are separate from your daily obligations. Brielle looked stunned that her own terminology had been turned back upon her without anger. She had expected hurt feelings, tears, or an emotional plea for inclusion reactions she could easily dismiss as oversensitivity. Instead, she faced a firm, pragmatic realignment of responsibilities. So you're just done helping us? Brielle asked, her voice sharp. I am done being convenient, I said. I will always be Clara's grandmother, but I am no longer your default assistant. Clara's 5th birthday took place on a bright Saturday afternoon at Riverfront Park. The pavilion was decorated with pastel balloons and 2 long picnic tables, held store-bought sandwich platters and juice boxes. Brielle's parents sat on one side conversing with a few neighboring families. Brielle looked visibly exhausted, rushing between setting out paper plates and keeping children away from the muddy riverbank. I arrived exactly at 1 o'clock, carrying a wrapped package containing a handcrafted wooden dollhouse I had spent the past 3 weeks restoring during my free evenings. When Clara saw me, her face lit up. Grandma, she shouted, running across the grass and wrapping her arms around my knees. Happy birthday, sweetheart, I said, kneeling down to return her hug and handing her the box. Nolan walked over carrying a cooler of ice. He looked tired, his shirt rumpled from setting up the heavy pavilion awnings without my usual early assistance. Yet when he looked at me, there was a new layer of cautious respect in his demeanor. Thanks for coming, Mom, Nolan said quietly, setting the cooler down. The dollhouse looks incredible. You did that yourself? I did, I said, standing up and smoothing my jacket. I have time for my projects now. Brielle walked past to adjust the cake table. She paused, nodded cordially toward me and said, Thank you for coming, Maren. You're welcome, Brielle, I replied with polite distance. There was no hostility in the air, but the old dynamic had completely dissolved. I did not step behind the food table to serve guests, nor did I stay late to gather trash bags. I sat on the bench, enjoyed a piece of cake with my granddaughter, spoke pleasantly with the other guests, and left promptly at 3 o'clock when the party concluded. 6 months later, autumn arrived in the valley, painting the maple trees along my street in deep shades of amber and gold. My life had developed a steady, fulfilling rhythm entirely independent of my son's household demands. 3 days a week, I worked at the County Historical Center. Eleanor and I had just finished cataloging the town's 19th century land records, a project that earned our department a state preservation grant. On weekends, I joined a local hiking group exploring the state park trails I had neglected for nearly a decade. My relationship with Nolan had shifted onto honest ground. He called every Sunday afternoon, not to request favors or drop off laundry, but simply to talk about his week and ask about my research. Once a month, he brought Clara over for Saturday morning breakfast. He would sit at the kitchen table, watch his daughter color pictures on the island, and drink coffee, no longer expecting me to manage his domestic stress. Brielle remained polite and distant. We exchanged cordial greetings during major holidays, but she never again attempted to dictate my schedule or utilize my home as an auxiliary resource. The invisible fence between us was solid, built not out of malice, but out of absolute clarity. Standing on my front porch on a brisk October morning, I held a warm mug of tea and looked out over my garden. The new locks on my doors remained firmly in place, not as a symbol of bitterness, but as a quiet reminder of self-respect. I had spent years believing that family meant endless accommodation at the expense of one's own dignity. Now, watching the morning mist rise above the quiet street, I knew the truth. Genuine peace only begins where unreciprocated sacrifice ends.